The Detroit Pistons are knocking at the door, and they are a legit threat to come out of the Eastern Conference. And yes, it's because of their young superstar, Cade Cunningham. But to me, it's a blessing in disguise that he was sidelined for this point of the season, because it got a chance for others to gain confidence. Guys like Jenkins, we saw them feature Jalen Duren more in the offense. We're never going to question the identity of the Detroit Pistons.
When the Detroit Pistons announced Cade Cunningham had suffered a collapsed lung following a collision with Wizards guard Trey Johnson and would be out indefinitely, that was supposed to be the moment their grip on the East's top spot finally loosened. So naturally, everyone wrote them off and said this team had no real shot without its leading man, especially heading into the playoffs. But that turned out to be one of the biggest mistakes the NBA media made all season. Because while everyone was busy writing Detroit's obituary, the Pistons were out there writing everyone else's.
Side for Danis. Danis drives. Danis from the baseline. Fires, fills it! With 24.6 left. Pistons by 1.
They went 8-3 without Cade, snapped the Lakers' 9-game winning streak, blew out Minnesota, and clinched the #1 seed against Philly. Then welcomed Cade back with a 107-111 demolition of Milwaukee. This team was supposed to fall apart. Instead, they leveled up. Their undrafted backup point guard out of St. Tom, Johns, dropped 30 on the Lakers and hit the dagger. Now his own teammates are begging him to talk more trash on the court. Their 22-year-old center is putting up stat lines only Isaiah Thomas has ever touched in a Pistons uniform. And Cade Cunningham, now back healthy, sent a message that should genuinely frighten the rest of the Eastern Conference. This is a breakdown of why the team everyone started doubting is actually built exactly the way championship teams are built, on defense and depth. And for the rest of the NBA that rode the Pistons off, that is a mistake they are about to pay for dearly. When Cade Cunningham's collapsed lung diagnosis hit the NBA world on March 19th, it could not have come at a worse time. These are the final weeks of the regular season, the stretch where teams fight to lock in playoff seeding, secure home court advantage, and chase every possible tiebreaker in the standings. This is not the moment you want to be missing your best player for an extended stretch. And because of that, a lot of people started saying the exact same thing, that the Detroit Pistons simply would not be able to sustain what they had built. And honestly, that is not an unreasonable take, because Cade Cunningham is the heart of everything Detroit does. He is averaging 24.5 points, 5.6 rebounds, and 9.9 assists per game. He controls the tempo, creates the offense, and dictates how this entire team operates. The numbers back all of that up. With Cade on the floor, the Pistons carry a plus 10.5 margin and a league-leading 121.8 offensive rating. Without him, that number drops to 111.5, which ranks near the bottom of the league. So yeah, when you lose a player averaging nearly 25-10 with just 14 games left while the Celtics and Knicks are right behind you fighting for seeding, the expectation is simple: you fall apart. The #1 seed slips away. Everything you built starts to unravel. Except the Pistons did not unravel. They just kept winning. Even without Cade, their primary creator and offensive engine, this team showed little to no real weakness. Detroit went 8-3 in those 11 games. And these were not all easy wins either. Most of them came against legitimate contenders, not tanking teams or bottom feeders. They snapped a red-hot Lakers team riding a 9-game win streak, with Luka playing some of the best basketball of his life. Then blew out Minnesota, handled Toronto, and clinched the #1 seed by beating Philadelphia.
Goes right down the middle, blocked that time. Down goes Reeves.
What a play by Thompson.
Wow.
And even the losses tell a story. 2 of them came in overtime. One against an Atlanta team that had won 14 of their last 15, and another against the league's best team in OKC, both decided by a combined 5 points. The third loss came in a game where Detroit rested most of its starters. But this stretch is not a lucky one either, because over the full course of the season, the Pistons are now 13-5 without Cunningham. The crazy part is not just that they are winning, it is how they are doing it. And once you understand that, you begin to see exactly why the Pistons are the #1 seed. Because this comes down to 2 things: defense and depth. Cade Cunningham's greatness comes from his ability to impact every inch of the floor. So replacing him was never going to be about one player stepping up. It had to be a team-wide shift. And that starts on the defensive end. Without Cade's steadying presence on offense, Detroit leaned fully into its defensive identity. They are second in defensive rating, first in steals, and first in forced turnovers. It shows in every game. They dictate tempo, control the paint, and force opponents into uncomfortable possessions. Rotations are sharper, communication is louder, and the physicality has gone up another level. But the real question was always offense, because Cunningham is the system. He accounts for 33% of Detroit's assists this season, and no other player is even above 10%, so replacing that level of playmaking should not be easy. And yet Detroit adjusted. Instead of running everything through one player, they leaned into ball movement, less isolation, more sharing, more players involved in creating offense. And somehow the results were surprising. In games without Cade, the Pistons are actually averaging more assists per game. The offense became less heliocentric and less predictable. Even without one of the league's best playmakers, they are also shooting slightly better. Field goal percentage increased slightly, and from three-point range, they are nearly 2 percentage points higher without Cade on the floor. Now it is still a small sample size, and none of this means Detroit is better without their best player. That is not reality. But what it does mean is that this stretch may have been a blessing in disguise, because the Pistons learned how to function without relying on one player. They are sharing the ball, adapting, and building habits that matter deeply in the playoffs, especially when defenses start trapping Cade and forcing the ball out of his hands. If you had told anyone before the season that the Detroit Pistons would lose Cade Cunningham for an extended stretch, that Isaiah Stewart would miss 25 games due to injuries and suspensions, and they would still be pushing 60 wins, they would have called you crazy. But that is exactly where Detroit is right now. Just 2 years ago, this was the laughingstock of the NBA. A team with no direction and no real hope. Now they are the undisputed #1 seed in the Eastern Conference. And the wild part is this was never supposed to happen. ESPN had Detroit winning 42 games and finishing 8th. Bleacher Report had them at 45. Even after a hot start, most projections still expected them to level out. Nobody outside of Detroit predicted this version of the Pistons, especially not with the injuries. That one-man team narrative is dead now, because the Pistons thrived without Cade, and in the process, they proved they are more than just names on a roster. This team is built on chemistry, patience, and work, things that do not get headlines, but absolutely win games. And heading into the final stretch of the season, that identity might be exactly what carries them. Because when Detroit lost its franchise star, 2 players stepped up in his absence and turned a potential disaster into a launching pad. Every contender needs guys who rise when the lights get brighter. Detroit found 2 of them in just 3 weeks, starting with Dennis Jenkins stepping in as the spark with Cade out. There is no denying Jenkins has been on an absolute tear since entering the starting lineup. On the season, he is averaging 9.5 points, 3.8 assists, and 2.3 rebounds. And while those numbers might not leap off the page, they represent a massive jump from where he was last year. Last season, he appeared in just 7 games for the Pistons, averaging 0.4 assists and 0.3 rebounds per game. But the real story is what he has done as a starter. In 19 starts this season, Jenkins is averaging 17.2 points, 7.4 assists, and 3.6 rebounds. And more importantly, the Pistons are 14-5 with him in the starting lineup. For an undrafted two-way player who was ineligible for last year's playoffs and had to watch the Pistons vs. Knicks series from his television, spent time in the G League and started this season just fighting to stay in the rotation, that kind of jump is massive. And to prove it was not a fluke, you only need to look at his performance against the Lakers. He dropped a career-high 30 points, including 6 in the final 34 seconds, a smooth step back followed by a confident mid-range jumper to put Detroit ahead and ultimately seal the 113-110 win over Los Angeles. That was enough to show his teammates he has that dog in him, the kind Tobias Harris encouraged him to show more of, even pushing him to start talking trash on the court because he could back every word of it up. Since then, Jenkins has been far more than just a fill-in. In Cade's absence, he provided scoring, set up teammates, and played better than advertised defense. He now looks more than capable of handling meaningful minutes in a full playoff run because Detroit will absolutely need it. Teams are going to trap and double Cade no matter what. When that happens, Jenkins becomes a crucial release valve, a guard who can bring the ball up, initiate offense, and attack the rim when defenses overcommit. The truth is, he has been underrated his entire career, which is exactly why he went undrafted in the first place, despite being one of the stronger players in his class. But at this point, he is becoming the Pistons' secret weapon. Not a name most casual fans know yet, but very soon they will. Perhaps the most unsurprising yet biggest revelation since Cade Cunningham's injury has been the emergence of Jalen Duren, who has looked like a genuine star since becoming the first scoring option. Duren's offensive game is not technically advanced like, say, Nikola Jokic, but the ball goes in the hoop far more than anyone questioning his offense seems to realize. He is posting a career year, averaging 19.5 points and 10.6 rebounds on an elite 64.5% from the field. In the process, he has solidified himself as one of the best frontcourt players in the entire league. Yet for all of that, the biggest question surrounding Duren has always been the same: whether he can truly be a reliable number 2 option on a championship-level team alongside Cade Cunningham. With Cade sidelined over the last few weeks, Duren suddenly found himself in exactly that role. The guy tasked with carrying the offensive load his running mate left behind. And to say he simply answered the call would not give him nearly enough credit. Duren has looked otherworldly lately, averaging 23.8 points, 10.6 rebounds, and 3.1 assists over his last 10 games, 9 of which came without Cunningham. Since the start of February, he has scored 20 or more points in more games than he has not. Over the last 2 months, he is averaging just over 21 points per game while still shooting well above 60% from the field. He also cannot be labeled a Cade Cunningham product. Yes, Cade makes everyone better. But in the 13 games this season without him, Duren is still averaging 22 points per game. So at this point, it is fair to say Duren has proven he can be a legitimate number 2 scoring option on a true contender. With the postseason approaching, there is no real reason to think this stops carrying over. His ability to get a bucket on his own is exactly what Detroit will need in the playoffs, using old-school fundamentals, physicality, and pure strength to dominate inside. Duren is an incredibly difficult matchup, especially for teams without a true physical big to throw at him. That is exactly the kind of advantage that becomes a real problem in the postseason, with Jenkins and Duren proving they can step up when needed. The Pistons are no longer a one-star team. They entered this season with only one all-star caliber player. They are heading into the playoffs with a star, a breakout big, and a fearless, hungry guard who already has a signature performance against a top-tier team. That is 3 players opposing coaches now have to seriously game plan for, and that changes everything. The Pistons are legitimately dangerous, and now Cade himself is back. If that does not send warning signals through the Eastern Conference, nothing will. The biggest question with Cunningham returning was whether he would be back at 100% or whether there would be any lingering effects from the injury. A collapsed lung is not a career-ending situation, but it is still something that can quietly affect conditioning and stamina. In the playoffs, even the smallest drop-off can matter greatly. That is why all eyes were on his return game against Milwaukee, and simply put, he looked good. Cunningham finished with a double-double, 13 points, 10 assists, and 5 rebounds on 6 of 11 shooting. From the eye test, there was no rust. His vision was still elite. His drives were still decisive and powerful, and there were no visible signs of fatigue after time away from the floor. Most importantly, Detroit dominated with him on the court. In 26 minutes, he was a +12, slightly above his season average of +7.8. For a team already proving it can survive without him, the return of Cade makes them even more dangerous. The crazy part is what Cade said about his first game back. Stars returning from injuries usually talk about rust, conditioning struggles, or finding their rhythm again. Cade said none of that, and that should worry every team in the East. Speaking to the media for the first time in weeks after the win, his assessment of his own performance was surprisingly confident. He said he felt really good, that he got some great cardio in during the game, and that all the training he had been doing put him in a great place where he was comfortable throughout every minute on the floor. What that means is simple. Cade does not believe his level has dropped at all. And that matters because Detroit's ceiling is still tied directly to him. His control, vision, and late-game presence cannot be replaced. In the playoffs, where the game slows down and everything turns into clutch possessions, that becomes even more critical. Because in those moments you need a dominant scorer and creator you can fully trust. Nobody on this roster fills that role as consistently as Cade Cunningham. Detroit has shown it can survive without him, and role players have stepped up tremendously in his absence. But in the postseason, you cannot survive on step-ups alone. You need your star locked in. So getting Cade back healthy, sharp, and in rhythm may be the single most important development of their entire season, especially with the added benefit of him carrying fresher legs into the playoffs. And when you add everything else in, Isaiah Stewart has also missed extended time but is now back, and his defensive presence is exactly what this team needs in a playoff environment. Then there is Ausar Thompson, who has been outstanding all season. He earned his second Defensive Player of the Month award in March, leads the league in steals and deflections, and is the only forward with 100-plus steals and 50-plus blocks, making a legitimate case for all defensive first-team honors. Because in the playoffs, offense matters. But defense is the baseline that separates contenders from pretenders, and Detroit now has both. They have their offensive engine back in Cade, a finishing machine in Duren, and a breakout sixth man in Dennis Jenkins, who has proven he can create when called upon. For opposing teams in the East, that combination is starting to look genuinely scary. The Pistons have lived through every emotion over the past month, from losing their franchise star to facing the possibility of a full derailment to rewriting the entire narrative. What looked like a potential disaster may have actually been a blessing in disguise. The role players got real reps, the defensive identity hardened further, and instead of falling apart, this team was forged into something stronger.